Hi, this is Brad Taylor. We had some big news yesterday in the Gaza war. Sinwar was killed. The head of Hamas was killed by Israel. And there's been a lot of people on TV talking about what's going on with this and how that's going to affect the war. And I thought I'd just give my thoughts. Some things you can think about when you're watching the news and you hear the talking heads bloviating. It actually ties into my last video on counter leadership targeting against Hezbollah with Nasrallah's death about dislocation versus replacement. I'm not going to go into that in depth. You can go look at that other video if you want to. Right now, though, in the war with Hamas, Israel has two competing goals. They want to eliminate Hamas. They've said that out front. We are going to destroy Hamas. And they want to get their hostages back. Those things, as that pertains to counter-leadership targeting, those things are diametrically opposed. In the goal of eliminating Hamas, that's a dislocation strategy. You're going to get rid of the leader and leverage the fight with his absence. It's basically what we knew in the military. It's called the OODA loop. In the 1950s, a fighter pilot invented the OODA loop for dogfighting. He said whoever was faster in the OODA loop would win the dogfight. And the OODA loop basically is you observe, you orient, you decide, you act. Now you can extrapolate that to conflict as a whole. He just did it for dogfights. You're in the air, you see an airplane, you observed it. You orient on it, see it's an enemy, you decide to shoot or you decide to run, and then you act. Whoever did that the fastest won the dogfight. Well, in counter-leadership targeting, you're taking out the D. For the dislocation strategy, they cannot make a decision. The enemy can observe and orient, but nobody's making a decision. It gives you leverage in the fight. It's not perfect on sub-state groups because sub-state groups are operating inefficiently as it is. Their primary goal, their number one thing they always have to keep in mind is to remain secret. Because of that, they don't use cell phones. You have to use runners. Their communication is very inefficient. So it's not as good as it would be on a state system if you just wipe the leader out and they're all using satellite communications. But it is pretty effective. The problem with this, though, is that in Sinwar's case, he knew he was going to die. He probably had a plan in place, said, when I'm gone, I want X to happen. Now, hopefully that X was not kill all the hostages, because that's the case. There's going to be a bloodbath today, and those were his final words. But speaking of hostages, there's a lot of people on the news saying right now that Sinwar's death is the end of the war. Rainbows are coming. Here come the unicorns. It's time to end the war in Gaza. Let's get the hostages back, which would be a wonderful thing, except that you need somebody to talk to in order to negotiate. That's the replacement strategy. A replacement strategy, you get rid of one leader, put in another because he's more amenable to your goals. It's very hard to do in a sub-state system. Hezbollah, which is a much more hierarchical and more organized organization than Hamas, still has not announced a leader replacement. In a state system, you know who it's going to be. When Queen Elizabeth passed away, there was no question who was going to be king. When Kennedy was assassinated, while it was tragic, there was never anybody wondering, I wonder who's going to be the next president. It's not the same way in a sub-state system, and especially with Hamas. Hamas has two wings. They've got a political wing and a military wing. And there's no real secession policy. Israel was negotiating with the political wing over and over again for the hostages to return, the ceasefire deals, all that stuff was going on right up until the end of July when they killed the head of the political wing in Tehran in a guest house. At that point, Sinwar, who was head of the military wing, took over both. Sinwar is just a bad dude. All he wants to do is kill people, but now he's the head of the political wing and the military wing. Now they've whacked him. So who is going to take over for Hamas? There's two problems here. Number one is the person that they've got to find somebody to take over. Right now, nobody knows because they've killed so many of the Hamas leadership. Who's it going to be? There's nobody standing in the wings. Number two, if the person that takes over has to be followed by the organization of Hamas. So if it's a political wing member that takes over, those guys are living in Doha, they're living in Cairo, they're eating the caviar, they're just flying on Learjets. Is the military wing even going to listen to them? So somebody from the political wing takes over and the military wing who's been fighting and dying and getting shot at this whole time, they're liable to say, I'm not listening to that blowhard, I'm going to do my own thing. On the other hand, if the military wing takes over, then the political wing says, we don't have anybody to negotiate with because it's just the military guys, you're going to have to talk to them. Well, nobody can talk to them because they're hiding in Gaza. So this secession policy is going to be a little bit longer than everybody seems to think. Yeah, getting rid of Sinwar was a good thing, but who's going to replace him is going to decide what the replacement strategy is going to be. Right now, that secession dilemma is going to hold Israel hostage. They can't do anything to get any kind of negotiation for ceasefire or return of the hostages until somebody is appointed, and that appointee is followed by the rest of the Hamas organization. On top of that, Iran is going to have to be involved in this, and that's going to complicate things even more. So the replacement strategy is going to take some time. On the dislocation side, they can do a lot, including fracturing the cells of Hamas. So once all used to work together, they're all coordinating. That's the whole point of the dislocation strategy. Now you've got these individual cells all over Gaza that are operating individually. Much easier to kill. Best case scenario, as Netanyahu actually alluded to when he said, hey, Sinwar's dead, let the hostages go, and you guys can just fade into the woodwork. That's a best case. Some cells holding a bunch of hostages, here's Sinwar's dead, their morale goes through the floor, and they say, you know what, I'm kind of sick of this. Just kick those hostages up to the street. We're going to fade into the refugees and just say we're regular Palestinians. Worst case, they all fight individually instead of coordinating and running through the tunnels, resupplying each other and all that kind of stuff. They don't have the decision-making capacity, and they're fighting individually to do it, which is much easier to eliminate. But on the dislocation side, Israel has another problem, something that's going to really complicate that, and that's two things: Iran and Lebanon. Sinwar's death was not a pre-planned raid. It wasn't a targeted operation where they knew, like we did with bin Laden, or we did with Saddam Hussein, or we did with Uday and Qusay, any of that. They had no ability to plan for the fallout after he died. He basically was moving in Gaza. A military organization was doing a sweep of the area, got in a gunfight. Next thing you know, holy moly, we just killed Sinwar. Because of that, they didn't pre-plan any follow-on operations. They didn't pre-plan any secession crisis. Any of that stuff has not been really thought through, and they're dealing with Iran. The big talk lately has been, what are they going to do against Iran? Well, if they attack Iran right now, that's going to focus the entire military on Iran. What's Iran going to do in response? And they can't do the dislocation strategy. They can't focus on Lebanon or on Gaza because they're all focused on Iran. The same token, right now they're focused in Lebanon. They're trying to get rid of the Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon. If they maintain their focus on Lebanon, they can't focus on Gaza. Those are all competing interests. Now, while the intelligence apparatus of Israel is very, very good, it's not omnipotent. They have finite resources, just as we did. We went into Afghanistan. Everything in America was focused on Afghanistan. 2003, we went to Iraq. Everything was focused on Iraq. Afghanistan became a backwater. We just didn't have enough planes, drones, intelligence asset, combat troops to do both. You had to make a choice. And Israel's going to have to make this same choice. Do they want to focus on dislocation strategy in Gaza because of the death of Sinwar, or do they want to hit Iran and hit Lebanon, etc.? On the replacement side, they can go ahead and hit Iran. They can go ahead and do what they want to do with Lebanon and just say, let Hamas sort this out. Let them. We're not going to do We're not going to do the dislocation strategy. We're going to let them sort it out, figure out who the leader is, and then we're going to get our hostages home. It's up to them to decide which way they want to go here. They definitely have a good shot at wiping out Hezbollah with the loss, or Hamas with the loss of Sinwar. But at the end of the day, not to be Debbie Downer on this thing, but killing Sinwar's death is a very, very, very good thing. That guy was a bloodthirsty savage, and he deserves to burn in hell. It gives Israeli a boon of options they didn't have before, which is a good thing, but it's not an immediate panacea. It's a lot more complicated than you see on the TV right now, in the op-eds I read today. Sinwar's dead, okay, unicorns are coming, it's all about peace, and hostages are coming home. There's a lot more to it than that, and I just hope you keep some of these thoughts in mind when you hear these people talking on TV today. Once again, I hope that made sense, and this is Brad Taylor signing off.